Britain was one of the first nations to develop tanks, and British armored vehicles played a major role in shaping the future of warfare. From the slow but historic machines of the First World War to the fast and deadly tanks of the Second World War, British tank design evolved through experimentation, battlefield experience, and constant adaptation. In this video, we will explain every major British tank in chronological order, divided into 3 stages: early armor, battlefield workhorses, and Britain's tank hunters and heavy hitters. Early British armor, 1918 to 1938. The story begins with the Mark V, one of the most important British tanks of the First World War. It was slow, heavy, and mechanically primitive by modern standards, but it represented a huge step forward in armored warfare. The Mark V helped prove that tanks could break trench deadlocks and reshape the battlefield. Its importance lies not in elegance, but in innovation. After the war, Britain continued to experiment with armored vehicles, and one result was the medium Mark II. This tank was more refined than the wartime designs and reflected the British effort to create a more practical armored force for future conflicts. It was still an interwar machine, but it helped bridge the gap between the first generation of tanks and the more specialized vehicles that followed. The Vickers Medium Mk3 was another step in British armored thinking. It was not built for the massive armored battles of later years, but it showed Britain's ongoing interest in medium tanks that could balance mobility, firepower, and support roles. Like many interwar designs, it was important as a development stage even if it never became a famous wartime icon. The light tank Mk6 was one of Britain's most widely used pre-war light tanks. It was small, quick, and suitable for reconnaissance and colonial service, but its light armor and modest firepower meant it would struggle in a modern war. Still, it was one of the last steps before Britain entered the Second World War and was forced to rethink tank design on a much larger scale. The cruiser Mk I marked a new direction for British armor. Britain was now thinking about speed, maneuver warfare, and the idea of using tanks as fast-moving exploitation vehicles. This tank introduced the cruiser concept that would shape much of Britain's armored development in the early war years. Britain's battlefield workhorses, 1939 to 1944. The Matilda II was one of the most famous British infantry tanks of the early war period. It was heavily armored for its time and could be extremely difficult to destroy with early enemy weapons. Its strength lay in protection, not speed, and that made it valuable in the early battles of the war. For a time, the Matilda II gave British crews a real edge in survivability. The Valentine was one of Britain's most produced tanks of the war. It was reliable, practical, and well-suited to infantry support roles. Although it was not the most powerful tank on the battlefield, it was sturdy and dependable, which made it useful in large numbers across many fronts. The Crusader was one of Britain's main cruiser tanks in the North African campaign. It was faster than the infantry tanks, but its light armor made it vulnerable in direct combat. The Crusader reflects Britain's effort to combine speed and fighting power during a period when desert warfare demanded mobility above all else. The Churchill was one of the most distinctive British tanks of the war. It had thick armor, excellent cross-country ability, and a design well-suited for difficult terrain. Although it was not fast, it was extremely capable in assault roles and became one of Britain's most respected heavy infantry tanks. The Cromwell represented a major improvement in British armored mobility. It was fast, modern, and much better suited to late-war maneuver warfare. The Cromwell showed that Britain had learned how to build a tank that could move quickly without giving up too much combat effectiveness. The Comet was the logical next step after the Cromwell. It improved firepower, protection, and battlefield performance, making it one of Britain's best late-war tank designs. The Comet helped bring British cruiser tank development to a far more mature level and showed how far the design had progressed since the early war years. Britain's tank hunters and heavy hitters 1943 to 1945. The Archer was a clever and unusual British tank destroyer built to deal with enemy armor. It mounted a powerful gun on a compact chassis, but the design required the gun to face backward, which made it unique among tank destroyers. Even so, it was a practical solution to a serious battlefield problem. The Challenger was Britain's attempt to mount a larger anti-tank gun on a cruiser tank platform. It was an ambitious design that reflected the need for stronger firepower against late-war German armor. The Challenger was not the most elegant British tank, but it shows how quickly the war forced tank design to evolve. The Sherman Firefly was not an original British tank design, but it was one of Britain's most famous wartime modifications. By fitting a powerful 17-pounder gun into the Sherman chassis, British crews created one of the most dangerous Allied tank killers of the war. The Firefly became especially important because it could defeat heavy German armor at longer range. The Black Prince was a heavy tank development based on the Churchill concept. It was built to carry heavier firepower and thicker armor, but by the time it appeared, tank design had already moved in a different direction. The Black Prince never became a mass-produced battlefield weapon, but it represented Britain's search for even stronger armored vehicles. The Centurion emerged at the end of the war and is often seen as the beginning of Britain's post-war tank era. It combined armor, firepower, and mobility far more effectively than many of the earlier designs. The Centurion was not just another tank. It was the foundation for one of the most successful British armored families in history. From the Mark V to the Centurion, British tank development tells the story of a nation that helped invent armored warfare and then kept refining it through 2 world wars. Some British tanks were slow, some were fast, some were heavily armored, and some were clever stopgap solutions. But together, they show how Britain transformed from an early pioneer of tank warfare into a major armored power. These machines did not all look the same, but each one played a part in the long evolution of British armor.